In 1851, on a sprawling Louisiana plantation, Charity lived a life defined by suffering that would break most souls. Chains bit into her wrists, leaving scars that never fully healed. Overseers struck without mercy, their whips cracking across her back. The master walked among his property with cold indifference, seeing her not as a human, but as a tool, a possession to command and exploit. Yet beneath this relentless oppression, a quiet, unyielding fire burned in Charity's heart. For years, she endured horrors that would have crushed any spirit, witnessing cruelty, theft of dignity, and the exploitation of those around her. But Charity was no ordinary woman. She listened. She watched. She learned. Every habit, every weakness, every pattern of those who wielded power over her became a piece of a puzzle only she could see. Silently, meticulously, she gathered knowledge as if preparing for a reckoning that had been decades in the making. She studied the guards' routines, the master's blind spots, the hidden paths of the plantation, and the vulnerabilities in the seemingly invincible hierarchy. By the New Year's feast of 1848, Charity's patience and cunning coalesced into action. When the moment came, what she unleashed was not merely revenge, it was a calculated, terrifying reclamation of justice that would echo through the plantation forever, leaving no one untouched by her defiance. Charity's life on the Louisiana plantation was a daily nightmare, a relentless cycle of cruelty that seemed to have no end. Born into bondage, she knew nothing but oppression, the harsh sun and the whip alike shaping her world. From the earliest memories she could summon, she felt the cold weight of chains on her wrists and the sharp sting of overseers' lashes on her back. Every command, every glance from the master was a reminder that her body, her labor, even her very thoughts belonged not to her, but to a system that thrived on subjugation. Yet, in the midst of this terror, Charity learned to survive. She became adept at moving unnoticed through the fields, the kitchens, the plantation corridors. Her presence was often invisible, her movements silent, while others saw only a compliant, broken slave. She observed, recorded, and remembered every careless gesture of the overseers, every lapse of attention by the master, every vulnerability hidden within the plantation's rigid hierarchy. Charity noted them all. Over time, she transformed her suffering into strategy. She memorized schedules, watched for patterns in punishment, and cataloged the weaknesses of every man who held power over her. She collected the tools of her future plans in plain sight, ingredients, implements, and knowledge that would later serve her purposes. Friends and fellow slaves whispered of her quiet nature, her patience, her uncanny ability to vanish from notice, unaware that they were witnessing a mind carefully assembling a force of retribution. One evening, after yet another brutal day, Charity felt a change stir within her. Survival alone no longer sufficed. The years of abuse, the stolen dignity, the stolen innocence, they demanded a reckoning. In that moment, a terrifying clarity struck her. Revenge was not only possible, it was inevitable. It would be precise, calculated, and it would leave an imprint so deep that the plantation itself would never be the same. Charity's suffering had forged a plan that was both patient and horrifying, a testament to the resilience of a spirit that refused to be broken, and a promise that justice, however grim, would finally come. Life on the Louisiana plantation was a relentless mixture of cruelty and monotony. Endless rows of cotton stretched under the scorching sun, and the overseer's eyes roamed constantly, whips in hand, ready to strike at the slightest lapse. The rhythm of punishment was predictable yet terrifying. One moment the fields were quiet, the next a scream would pierce the air, a body trembling under a lash. Each day felt the same, but for Charity, every repetition was an opportunity. Every glance, every movement, every whisper of routine was etched into her mind with painstaking care. Charity moved through her tasks with apparent obedience, the precision of her labor concealing the storm growing within. She plucked cotton, scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and ran errands, all under the oppressive watch of men who believed themselves masters of the world and of her. But Charity's mind was elsewhere, cataloging, memorizing, and planning. She observed the overseers in detail, The patterns of their footsteps, the times they drank, the moments they laughed carelessly, the foods they favored. She noted when the master left the dining hall unsupervised, when the lanterns flickered, when doors were left ajar. Over months and years, she learned patience beyond what most could imagine. She began to act subtly, inserting small traces of poison into drinks and meals. A hint of bitterness here, a silent alteration there. No one noticed, no one suspected, and yet every action carried purpose. Charity's attention to detail was meticulous. The sugar bowl, the wine, the preserves, all became instruments in a quiet, deadly orchestra. She did not act recklessly. Every jar, every drop, every small preparation was calculated, measured, and hidden in plain sight. In the kitchen, she hummed softly as she worked, a mask of normalcy hiding the mind of a strategist. In the fields, she bent over her chores, the sun beating down on her back, as though every bead of sweat fortified her resolve. Other enslaved people whispered about her patience and uncanny calm, unaware that they were witnessing someone building a force of vengeance that would shake the very foundation of the plantation. Evenings were no less controlled. While others slept or whispered softly in the barracks, Charity reviewed her notes mentally, imagining the moment her plans would unfold. Her body bore the scars of punishment, but her spirit was unbroken. Every drop of poison, every careful step, every hidden action was a step toward justice she knew the law would never provide. A justice born entirely of her own cunning, patience, and unyielding will. The plantation remained a place of suffering, but in the shadows, Charity's silent storm was rising, ready to strike with the precision of a force that had been decades in the making. By the New Year's feast of 1848, the plantation was alive with its usual celebration. Long tables groaning under platters of roasted meats, pies and jars of preserves, candles flickering in the warm Louisiana night, and laughter echoing across the great hall. The overseers, bloated with pride and indulgence, believed themselves untouchable, their cruel authority cemented by years of unquestioned dominance. They had no inkling that the calm, quiet figure who moved among them, serving wine and arranging dishes, had spent years preparing for this single moment. Charity glided through the room with the grace of invisibility. Each pour of wine was deliberate, each spoonful of preserves placed with meticulous care. Her face bore the mask of obedience, her movements practiced and unremarkable. No one suspected that behind her steady hands burned the quiet fire of a woman who had endured years of brutality, exploitation, and unspeakable violation. Every glance she cast toward the men who had tormented her was measured, her eyes revealing nothing, yet memorizing everything. As the feast progressed, the first overseer took a hearty sip of wine, oblivious. Charity's heart remained calm, her pulse steady. Then came a sudden cough, a stumble, a hand clutching a chest in confusion and pain. The room froze as he collapsed, the shadows of candlelight dancing over his convulsions. Shock rippled through the tables, disbelief and panic cutting through the smug arrogance that had ruled the room moments before. One by one, the others began to falter, their laughter replaced by gasps, confusion, and terror. Each bite, each sip, each moment carefully orchestrated by Charity over years of observation ensured that no one escaped the inevitability of her revenge. She did not revel in cruelty. She moved with the precision of someone who had endured the unendurable, whose patience had honed a sense of justice beyond the law, beyond mercy. The master, seated at the head of the table, could barely comprehend what was unfolding. His power, so long absolute, was meaningless against the calculated brilliance of the enslaved woman he had ignored, degraded, and violated. Charity remained composed, her calm a sharp contrast to the chaos consuming those who had ruled through fear. By the time the last overseer fell, the hall was silent save for the whisper of her quiet breathing. Charity had acted not out of fury, but of unwavering strategy, a patient hand shaping the fates of those who had shaped hers. The New Year's feast, meant to celebrate wealth and power, had become a testament to resilience and justice. In those carefully measured actions, every jar, every glass, every shadowed glance became part of a reckoning that no law, no overseer, no master could ever anticipate. Historians examining records, oral histories, and remnants of the old Louisiana plantation would later uncover the full scale of Charity's work. What had begun as whispered rumors and hushed tales passed among the enslaved became undeniable through careful investigation. 87 heads, preserved meticulously in jars she had crafted herself, each one a silent testament to years of suffering endured and observed. Every head was catalogued with painstaking precision, labeled not in ink but in memory, each representing the overseers who had ruled through cruelty, fear, and the exploitation of every human being under their control. Charity's act of vengeance was unprecedented in its scope and deliberation. She had transformed ordinary preserves, jars of fruit, wine, and other seemingly innocuous items into instruments of justice, carefully administering her plan over years without detection. Each overseer, arrogant in their assumed invincibility, fell into her carefully orchestrated design. The horror of her actions was undeniable, yet it was not born of mindless fury, but of calculated patience, a response to the systemic cruelty that had sought to erase her existence. In the aftermath, Charity became almost a ghost in the historical record. Her name appeared rarely, whispered only in fear or awe by those who survived her quiet revolution. Plantation records, biased and incomplete, largely ignored her, yet the legacy of her rebellion endured in the jars, in the silent testimony of those who had seen or suspected her cunning. She was a shadow in history, a woman whose life had been defined by suffering, yet whose power transcended the chains that bound her body. Her story is more than horror. It is a monument to resilience and strength that defied every expectation of who could hold power on a plantation. Through patience, observation, and relentless cunning, Charity converted helplessness into dominance, cruelty into justice, and survival into an assertion of humanity that could not be denied. The plantation, once filled with the sounds of terror, oppression, and command, became a place of silence, where fear reigned not through whip or word, but through the invisible, unyielding hand of a single woman who had waited her entire life for the moment to reclaim control. Charity's vengeance resonates through time, a chilling reminder that intelligence, patience, and courage, when applied with precision, can overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression. In every jar, every careful placement, every silent observation, she left an indelible mark, a record of defiance that whispers through history, horrifying, unforgettable, and unyielding. What makes Charity's story so haunting is not just the horror of her acts, but the chilling intimacy and precision behind them. Each jar of preserves, each carefully poisoned meal, was not the product of blind rage, but a calculated strategy honed over years. Every overseer she observed, every pattern of cruelty she catalogued, became part of a plan executed with relentless patience. There was no chaos in her vengeance, only method, intelligence, and a mind shaped by unyielding endurance. Experts who later studied plantation records, family accounts, and the oral histories passed down among the enslaved were struck by the meticulous nature of her work. Charity had turned the very tools of daily life, wine, fruit, sugar, and jars, into instruments of subtle, devastating justice. It was a precision that required patience, timing, and an uncanny understanding of human behavior. She understood when an overseer would drink deeply, when one would lean too close, when a jar would pass unexamined. Each action was deliberate, measured, and exacting, but the story transcends the act of vengeance itself. In every poisoned meal and every silent, methodical step, Charity asserted something deeper: her humanity, her intelligence, her agency. In a system designed to strip her of all control, to render her body, labor, and very existence property, she carved a space of autonomy and power. She demonstrated that even in chains, one could resist, could write a counter-narrative to the story of oppression, could leave a mark that history could not fully erase. For historians and researchers, the realization is both inspiring and terrifying. Charity did not merely survive. She orchestrated a form of justice that required foresight, patience, and an unbreakable will. It is a reminder that power, in its quietest form, can manifest in ways that evade official records, evade recognition, and evade the authority of oppressors. Her story survives as a warning, a testament and a whisper through time. Cruelty, no matter how absolute, can be met with cunning, intellect, and relentless resolve. The jars preserved meticulously are silent witnesses to her defiance. The poisoned wine, the overseer's ignorance, the patient waiting, they all speak to a truth often ignored by history. Those who are oppressed can, and sometimes will, assert their power in ways that leave an indelible mark. Charity's life and vengeance continue to echo through the centuries. They remind us that acts of resistance can be invisible, intimate, and devastatingly effective, and that history often hides the stories of those who quietly changed the world through patience, intelligence, and unwavering courage. After the events of the New Year's feast of 1848, Charity disappeared into the shadows of history. No plantation records, no letters, and no official documents account for her movements. Some whispered that she fled, vanishing into nearby swamps or towns, blending into a world that offered her anonymity and safety. Others believed she remained on the outskirts of the plantation, living in secrecy, watching from the edges, invisible to those who had once enslaved her. Her life after the act of vengeance remains a mystery, yet the impact of her courage and cunning resonated long after her departure. Stories of her intelligence and patient rebellion were passed down orally among the enslaved and later among freed workers. Even decades later, descendants would speak of her quietly with reverence and awe, recognizing the audacity, skill, and meticulousness with which she executed her plan. Charity's actions were not merely about revenge, they were a lesson in agency and survival, a demonstration that a single individual, no matter how oppressed, could rewrite the rules of power through patience, observation, and strategy. The jars, though long gone, became legendary symbols. They were not only reminders of horror, but of extraordinary resilience. Each preserved head represented the culmination of years of suffering, transmuted into a methodical assertion of control, a message written not in ink, but in intelligence and precision. Charity transformed helplessness into a statement, cruelty into consequence, and invisibility into a weapon. Historians examining plantation records, diaries, and local law were struck not just by the act, but by the psychological mastery it required. Every poisoned jar, every calculated weight, and every silent observation testified to a mind honed under oppression. Charity's story became a chilling reminder. Even under the most absolute domination, the human spirit can carve out power, agency, and justice in unexpected, devastatingly effective ways. Her legacy endured because it was subtle, yet monumental. She was never celebrated publicly, her deeds unrecorded by conventional history, but they left a mark on all who learned of them. Charity became a symbol of resistance, intelligence, and survival, a testament to the idea that oppression cannot entirely extinguish the will to reclaim power, even in the most hidden and ingenious forms. Through silence, shadows, and patience, Charity showed the world that revenge, justice, and autonomy could exist even where laws and morality had failed. She remains a ghostly presence in history, a reminder that strength is not always loud, and power is not always visible, but it can be decisive, eternal, and unforgettable. Some histories are recorded in books, some in whispers, carried quietly from one generation to the next. Some truths are too dangerous, too subversive, or too uncomfortable to be written down, yet they endure in memory, rumor, and fear. Charity's story belongs to the latter. A woman born into chains, subjected to unspeakable cruelty, yet she transformed helplessness into strategy, oppression into intelligence, and suffering into consequence. Her actions were never loud or public. They were calculated, patient, and devastatingly precise. Every poison jar, every careful observation, every small act of defiance was a statement of agency in a world designed to strip her of all power. The plantation, once ruled by terror and domination, was left silent not through law, not through soldiers, not through punishment, but through the quiet cunning of a single enslaved woman who refused to remain invisible. Her vengeance became a lesson written not in ink, but in action, survival, and intellect. Look closely at history. Sometimes the most horrifying truths are not recorded on battlefields or in courtrooms. They are hidden in the shadows, in the lives of those whose voices were silenced, whose stories were almost erased. These are the acts of defiance that ripple across time, waiting for recognition, waiting to remind the world that strength can emerge from the most powerless places. And as always, the truth was never buried. It was only revealed. This is Truth Uncaged. Subscribe, stay curious, and remember, some acts of defiance echo across centuries, haunting memory, whispering justice, and challenging the world to see what history tried to erase.